Are we all ready? All right, should we go? Hello and welcome to Tuesday's Electoral Dysfunction. I'm back home after a whirlwind of a week on the campaign. Ruth, where are you?
I am home, and you and I are both a little bit subpar, aren't we? We're not 100%, but for very different reasons. Because you've been working very hard, and I have actually, had some socialising, which, I don't know what I was thinking of. I used to be fun in my 20s. I'm not fun in my 40s. I had fun this weekend, and I'm really struggling because of it.
Ruth's been on a 2-day bender.
I can't do any more. I can't.
Well, so Ruth, you're at home. Ayesha, where are you?
I am in beautiful Scotland. I was in Dundee on Saturday, and then I've been through with my parents in East Renfrewshire in Newton Mearns, just on the outskirts of Glasgow. So I've been doing some door knocking, which has been really interesting. And yeah, I'm going to be heading through to Coatbridge because, of course, I've just become Baroness Hazarika of Coatbridge. So I'm going to be heading through to Coatbridge to do some door knocking as well, to test the temperature.
And did we all watch the football?
Me and Ayesha have different football to watch.
We had quite different experiences about the... So I was flying up to Aberdeen and Dundee on Friday night just as the football was starting, and as the plane was just about to take off, the guy next to me started swearing, like Father Jack started swearing, and he turned around to me and he went, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Matt, I'm so sorry for that outburst. I've just seen the score," and at that point it was 3-0. And then when we landed, he turned on his phone, and I can't even repeat. I heard swear words I've never even heard before coming out of this guy's mouth.
Let's crack on. We've got about a fortnight of campaigning to go. We'll look at how Labour and the Conservatives are approaching things. Can Labour shake off questions about tax rises? Are the Tories changing tactics to keep up with reform? And with both of you lovely ladies in Scotland, I want to know what the mood is like as the SNP launch their manifesto this week. And Nigel Farage is also launching, he's not called it a manifesto because he says people don't believe them. He's called it a contract. And we're going to answer a batch of your questions later on. We've been getting lots, so we'll go through a few more. Remember, you can always email us on electoraldysfunction@sky.uk or get us on the burner phone 07934 200 444. OK, let's crack on. We have just over a fortnight of campaigning to go. I did text Chris Mason on Friday and said, "Chris, we are over the hump. It's hump day is past."
There is a dip, though. I've always thought of elections are 2, 2 and 2. So your first 2 weeks, it's exciting, an election's been called, you're out doing everything. The middle 2 weeks are a grinds, they're hard. That's when the colds hit. That's when you start getting campaign sniffles, the whole lot. And then the last 2 weeks, you suddenly realise, oh my God, there's only 2 weeks to go. That's not enough time. I can't get to everything. And then it's over.
And then it's over. In a blink of an eye, it's over.
It has felt very strange, this election, partly because of the surprise that came when he announced it. So nobody was ready. Nobody was ready across any political party. A lot of us commentators, journalists, nobody was ready for this. So I feel like it's been weird because normally you kind of know when an election is coming and you're kind of gearing up for it. So the first 10 days of this election just felt like it was kind of scramble stations where people were still trying to get selected, and lots of the parties didn't have their candidates in place. And, everybody was frantically pulling a grid together to try and get things done. And I feel like last week was a bit more exciting because, of course, we had a couple of really good events, your event in Grimsby, and then the 7-way debate, and then the manifestos. But it has felt like this election campaign, even though it was a surprise, it feels like it's been going on for about 8 years, and it's not felt that energised. And maybe that's because the poll lead is so big for Labour. Maybe it's because, everybody feels, I know not hardly any votes have been cast, but it feels like a foregone conclusion. But what's been interesting about, I think, the last week is it's felt interesting because of really what's happening with reform, and even the manifestos haven't been that exciting. Do you know what I mean?
It's not interesting because the two leaders are boring. They want to be boring. They're using boring as a good thing, in that after all of the excitement of the policy positions of Corbyn and his general outlook on, geopolitics, Starmer's, something that's not going to scare the Tory swing voters that Labour needs to win. Because of Boris's anachronisms, let's call them that, and also his behaviour and Partygate and all the rest of it. Having Rishi, who's boring and managerial, was something that the Tories look to be a benefit, but it doesn't make for fun campaigns.
I wonder, though, as well, that is part of this about when the election was first called, it felt like the Conservatives had surprised everyone. Labour were ready to go, but it was a surprise. So they had a sort of advantage in controlling the date and surprising people. And then there was an expectation, I think, from all of us actually in Westminster, whether rightly or wrongly, that the polls would inevitably narrow, because that's typically what would happen. And then kind of the tenor of the campaign, and particularly the D-Day problem, is it hasn't shifted the dial. And so the jeopardy is, you were saying, Ruth, the jeopardy in all of it really has become the rise of reform. That's been the kind of dynamic story in the election. And maybe it doesn't feel as exciting, although I'm massively excited about it, but that's useful because otherwise, my job wouldn't be much fun, would it? But, I guess the question is as well that, Ayesha, let's go to you first. What do you think about turnout? Do you think Labour are worried about apathy in this election?
I think Labour is just focused on getting over the line and winning big. But I think individual MPs and individual sort of Labour strategists are a bit worried about that. And certainly when I've been out and about this weekend in Scotland, particularly when I was in Dundee, going around chatting to people, the overriding theme, and I must have spoken to, about 50, 60 people, was apathy, like real apathy. The number of people who almost had a script, they were almost singing from the same hymn sheet, and that was, I feel really disillusioned with politics right now. I don't really know who to vote for. I might not even vote at all. A lot of people said that they might not even bother going. Quite a few people said that they would go and spoil their ballot paper. And a lot of people said, look, I do want a change and I probably will vote for a change, but I don't think whoever comes in next is capable of making my life any better. So I think that is the thing that all politics is up against right now. And I think that Labour is conscious of that. Not so much about the sort of turnout, but more that kind of feeling of despondency and the fact that we're not, if Labour wins, it's not like there's going to be a humble, grateful public who are like, oh, thank you so much for winning. We're just so pleased that you've won. There's going to be street parties across the country because, the public are impatient, they're demanding, they're quite transactional now. Yeah. And they basically like, what are you going to do for me? And that's where a lot of people don't feel that anybody can really change their lives.
But the lack of belief, Ayesha, I think is partly down to the parties' offerings themselves. And I've said before, Labour, instead of doing the hopey changey thing, which is what like the Obama campaign always called their thing, like hope and change, they've gone heavy on change, but actually haven't gone at all on hope. They haven't really been doing the, things can only get better. They've done things can't get much worse. The tenor of the campaign has not been, there's going to be a revolution, a big change is coming, we're going to wash away all of the things that make you think that Britain is broken, or that things don't work as well, or that your life is, is struggling. They've been deliberately underselling the type of change that can occur for me. And I get why. I understand the idea that you under-promise and over-deliver. But I do think there was a slight trick missed in terms of being able to tell a kind of national story about the future of like what Britain would look like 5 years from now with the Labour government, and here's your hope as well as your change. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Ayesha, when at the manifesto launch last week, I put it to Starmer that this was for all of the change that he rhetorically was talking about. When I hear him talk about change, what I hear is the word patience. And the reason I say that is I can see that they are talking about changing the government, changing the people who run the country. But when you actually look at the nuts and bolts of what that change means, it sort of means give us some time to try and rebuild the economy so that then we can change your lives. And I said to him, you're like Captain Caution. And he swatted me off like an irritating fly. That's fine. But I do think the argument stands that this is not a radical plan for Britain, is it? And maybe that's why people don't feel that inspired.
I think that the difficulty for where Keir Starmer is and where the Labour Party is, there's a couple of things. First of all, I think we just have to remember historically, this country does not like voting in Labour prime ministers. In the last 100 years, only 4 Labour prime ministers have ever been elected. There have been 6 Labour prime ministers in total, only 4 of them been elected. I think as well, because of what's gone before in the country and in the party, revolution has been promised and not delivered. So, for example, Corbyn promised the world. You know, when you look back at that 2019 manifesto, it was like a free-for-all. Everybody could have everything they wanted. I think they lobbed in kind of free broadband in the middle of the campaign, and all the WASPy women going to get all their money. I mean, it was very revolutionary, and the public ultimately rejected it. We also had Brexit, which was meant to be this big moment of revolution. The country was rising up. Everything was going to change for the better. We were going to have this amazing country afterwards. That has not happened. So I think the Labour strategy, understandably, has been, we are not going to do this kind of false promise of revolution because it has not gone very well and people aren't stupid. I mean, someone said to me over the weekend, I don't think Keir Starmer is that exciting at all, but quite frankly, my mortgage has just gone up. I'm really stressed out about my life. I wouldn't mind a bit of, boringness if it just means my life gets back on track and I can just, me and my family can afford a nice holiday once a year and we can afford our car insurance and, we're not stressing about our bills every month. So I think that, I understand that's why they're doing this, but I also do understand all of this doesn't quicken the pulse.
As it looks like they are marching to power, people are now really, really testing them on policies and the plans. And the front of the Mail is, has Labour let the cat out of the bag on tax? And that's based on the Wes Street in Sunday round, where he sort of intimated that we're not going to write future budgets in a manifesto now. And it just fed into actually the line that Starmer has had, which is there are no plans, but there is wiggle room there. Do you think that this could be an effective attack line, Ruth, for the Conservatives in the last 2 weeks of the campaign? I can see 2 attack lines coming from them. They'll raise your taxes. It's what they've been trying, but it feels like it's getting steam. Laura Kuenssberg was asking them all about the council tax rebanding that we'd done on Wednesday night. So it's the tax stuff. And then, of course, the, vote reform, get Labour. Ruth, how worried should the Labour be on this?
This could have worked for the Tories if they hadn't flubbed the launch. So this all comes back to what you've said about the idea that everyone assumed that the polls would tighten and they haven't. And part of that is because there was a catastrophic launch in the peeing rain that everybody saw. It then followed up with 2, 3, 4 days of really roping campaigning before they had to do a reset. And if we had seen a tightening of the polls early on, the pressure that would have been put on Labour during the course of this campaign would have been a lot stronger. And things like tax, which is something that the Tories have been hammering from the beginning, if there's going to be a Labour government, start saving, all that sort of stuff. Like, it's not a bad line. But the reason that when Starmer's been doing the rounds, Wes Streeting's been doing the rounds, Emily Thornberry's been doing the rounds, all the people have been doing the rounds, that they haven't been pressed on. But because there's not been that tightening, actually, this has been a bit of a scoosh of a campaign from Labour. They've been disciplined. They've been impressively disciplined, but they haven't had the sort of pressure that previous Labour campaigns have been put under, because actually the Tories haven't done it. So it's sort of Tory failing that they've not landed this line, even though it's the best line they've got left.
Ayesha, you're nodding there. Do you think that Labour could raise some more taxation later this year when they get in and they lift the bonnet up and they look at public spending?
Well, they've definitely got an argument, which is they don't really know what's going on until they get in there. I know that, the access talks, and this is when a prospective government gets in to sit down with the civil service. They were sort of making some progress with that. And I spoke to some senior advisors, some Treasury advisors, who were saying, look, that, from the talks we've had so far, the numbers are looking pretty bad. So they have got that as a legitimate excuse. There's 2 lines of attack from the media and the government, which is, as you say, you're not very exciting, where's the hopey changey bit? And the second thing is taxes. Now, no party is ever going to do a repeat of read my lips, no new taxes, right? Because they can't. Yeah. Because you cannot say that over the next 5 years, you're going to predict what's going to happen and you can never, ever raise taxes. But I think the reason why this attack line is not working, and as Ruth said, it's not a bad attack line.
Yeah.
And having fought many election campaigns and lost with the Labour Party before, fiscal responsibility has always been a massive Achilles heel for us, right? Always been a big issue. But I think the three things which are hurting the Conservative attack line is, number one, they have put taxes up themselves. Number two, they issued these quite shonky figures, and you've got all these official people saying, be very wary about these statistics. You've even got The Spectator, which is the Bible of the Conservative Party, saying, guys, these figures are shonky. The third aspect is why this is not landing is because of Rachel Reeves. Rachel Reeves has done so much heavy lifting on all the economic stuff. You know, she has drilled into every single shadow minister from the cabinet level, shadow cabinet, down to junior ministers, that nobody is making a penny of spending commitments because she does not want to have to raise taxes. So I just think for all those reasons, this tax thing, yes, I understand people are always kind of worried about sort of taxes, but it's just not landing.
When I ask them questions and they say, we're not going to cut public services, we're not raising anything beyond the specific taxes that we've already announced and allocated the money, and we're going to stick within the borrowing limits of the Conservatives, I'm like, all of those three things together are not possible because it doesn't add up. And I think people, and I'm sure our listeners can see that as well, that if you are saying I'm Keir Starmer and there's no austerity and we're not going to cut public services, they're going to have to find some option, right? And the only other option in the short term will be taxes, because growth you have to wait for.
Yeah, you do have to wait for growth. And I, again, you know, I've put this to Labour colleagues and this has come up. But one thing you did miss out was any more borrowing.
But the point is that Rachel Reeves has stuck. She's sticking to the borrowing rules.
You say that, Beth. Ruth and I
hold our fingers up.
Their fingers at me.
We're doing a full penny more. I'm going to start screaming taxes at both of you now. So fiscal rules are in the gift of the Chancellor, basically, to tweak. And there is always a bit of wriggle room with fiscal rules.
Okay.
So Rachel Reeves comes in. She's not doing a budget straight away. She will do some sort of budget, you know, I would imagine like 4 or 5 months down the track. So I just think that could be an area where you see a tiny bit of wriggle room.
One of the things that I'd be getting to look at is because these borrowing rules that you talk about, Beth, and that you often hear being talked about on the news, they are made up by the Chancellor of the day. These are not written in stone. They're not laws. They're not passed by Parliament. Like, these are self-imposed disciplines that a government tells to the money markets, the wider business community, to allow for confidence in the United Kingdom. And if you can prove yourself in these ways, you get lower rates when you do borrow, you get access to liquidity, you get all of these different things. So they have a purpose, but they're not actually a thing. They're not a hard and fast thing. And if I was in the Treasury team, one of the things that I would start to look at is, right, what are my self-imposed restrictions around increasing borrowing going to be? So, for example, we have heard previous chancellors and previous prime ministers talking about things like, we will only borrow to invest, which will result in further growth. Now, you're not supposed to invest in much that doesn't give you any less than £4 back for every pound you put in. So if on your ledger you can look at what something gets back, you can borrow against your future earnings as a country, because the thing that you're doing is going to increase the growth, is going to increase the returns. So if I was in Rachel Reeves' team, this would be the sort of thing that I'd be looking at.
And I guess the question in this is, so as Ruth was saying, the reason that governments put in strict borrowing rules, especially if you're Labour and in the past business has been a bit more nervous about a Labour government in terms of economic stability, you put this in to give reassurance.
See, a lot of people wrongly think that Rachel Reeves just going to say this, no taxes, and then she's going to get into the Treasury and suddenly the mask is going to come off and she's going to be, haha, I'm going to raise taxes. I really do not think she is going to do that. A, for the reasons you say, because it would be a terrible look for the public. But also, it's just not where Rachel Reeves' thinking is right now.
Yeah.
By the way, there are other people in the Labour Party who would like her to put taxes up, but she is very much holding her own line.
But also, let's not forget the other thing that everybody knows about Rachel Reeves, if they know anything about her at all, which is that she is like a schoolgirl chess champion. This is not going to be Boris Johnson standing up one day and he's not written a speech and he's got some stuff written in his napkin and goes, I know we're going to have a garden bridge, or I know we're going to like have a heliport for everybody's back garden, or like just making shit up on the hoof. Like, she is going to be meticulous. We are going to be bored out of our merry little minds before she gets to the point where she changes something like this. The pitch will be rolled because she's not the type that's just going to like pull a rabbit out of a hat on budget day. That's not her.
You sound like you really like Rachel Reeves, Ruth.
I think for an incoming Labour Chancellor, you need to have a credibility. And I think that she has worked very hard. She has done the milk rounds in the city. I know many people that have been to events that she's been at from the business community who might not think that she's perhaps the best speaker. She's not the most fluent. She maybe doesn't even have the kind of depth of knowledge and experience that they think they have, but then people in the city love to think that they're amazing and everybody else is shit, particularly politicians. But in terms of like soothing the horses, not scaring the horses, she has done a bit of a shift.
The read my lips moment, by the way, is a George Bush line. That was from the 1988 Republican convention. That's George Bush Senior. Read my lips, no new taxes. And this has been, it's kind of gone into sort of like political folklore, hasn't it? Read my lips. It became one of those phrases that has endured.
Another phrase is the rabbit out the hat, right? That's something that, you know, that's a sort of tautology which is always used in politics now. There's no rabbits out the hat. But I've been thinking a lot about this phrase, the rabbit out the hat, with Labour. And I think the problem for Labour is under the Corbyn years, there were so many rabbits out of hats, it became like sort of Watership Down. That's why the Labour Party is quite allergic to the concept of a rabbit out of a hat.
I've just, as you talk about Watership Down, I've just got like Bright Eyes, like which was like the song in Watership Down, which is like, don't ever let your kids watch that.
Now you've mentioned Bright Eyes, I should tell you all that at a big international event in Japan last year, Robert Peston and I, all the political journalists on the trip, went to karaoke, and Robert Peston and I performed Bright Eyes, and it was
wow.
Yeah, it was I don't know, it's a magic. It was a magic moment, but we've got to move on, so we're going to have to stop.
Listen, I just want to add, listeners, if anybody out there can get hold of this footage, Ruth and I will pay a bounty for this footage. Beth, I see a Christmas #1 on the horizon. You and Robert Peston.
It was a beautiful thing.
Can I just say, when this election's over, I hope we are having an electoral dysfunction karaoke night out.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sugar Cube in Edinburgh, let's do it. Let's get it booked.
While we've been chatting, Grant Shapps has become, it looks like, the first minister to publicly acknowledge that the Tories are unlikely to win the next election. He says he's being realistic. He told Times Radio, it's possible to win the election. Do I accept it's not the most likely outcome? Yes, I accept that. I'm a realist. Do we do that mid-campaign, anyone? Ruth?
I have to say, I take a little bit issue with the idea that that's the first time there's been an acknowledgement from within the Tory campaign, because they've literally been running a line that says Labour are on course for a supermajority. The only way to stop a supermajority is to please come back to us and vote for us and don't vote for reform.
I'm going to jump in there. Every time the Prime Minister is asked about the polls or it looks like they're not going to win, he always says the only poll that counts is on July the 4th. There is a difference, though, isn't there, Ruth, between intimating it might happen and someone actually saying that you're going to... I mean, you never say that, do you? Do you ever say that in a campaign?
Well, I 2016, I mounted an entire campaign on the fact that I wasn't going to be First Minister and vote for me to be a strong opposition, which was... It worked for us in the context, and we more than doubled our number of seats. But to be fair, I was coming from third, so it's better than if you're the actual incumbent, I think.
I guess the question is, Ruth, for morale for Tory activists and stuff, is it a real kick in the guts if your defence secretary's going on telly going, yeah, we're probably not going to win this?
In this campaign, I mean, the stuff that kicked people in the guts has already happened. And also, I'm not sure, and no disrespect to Grant Shapps, but I just don't think that many Tories are going to have looked at the sort of the salted wells, the smouldering desolation that this entire campaign has been, and think that this moment where Grant Shapps says, do you know what, lads, we might not win, like that's going to be the one that's going to really get us down.
Ruth, what's going on here? Is it that actually they are now changing tactics with 2.5 weeks to go to start warning about a Labour supermajority to try and squeeze the reform vote, to try and salvage what they can of the Tory base. Is this a sort of strategic shift in the campaign now, do you think?
I think it might well be, because they've had time to test stuff. They've already been running lines about don't give them a supermajority. The only thing that reform does is make Keir Starmer Prime Minister. So these lines have already been running. This may well be a pivot to concede now. It may just be that Grant Shapps is ill-disciplined and said something or gone further than he wanted to. But I do think they need to do something.
Ayesha, do you think that Labour will be worried about this attack from the Conservatives about the supermajority and don't give him unparalleled power?
I don't think the Labour Party is at all quaking in their boots. In fact, I think the Labour Party cannot actually believe that Grant Shapps introduced into the bloodstream of this election campaign the very word Labour supermajority. It was like a shot in the arm of enthusiasm for Labour candidates. I've had Labour candidates from across the country messaging me going, we would love a supermajority, and if this is coming from the mouth of the sort of Conservative spokesperson, then it proves that we're on track for something big. I mean, it is a bit about the vibes and it is about confidence. And if you have got the government, who have been the ruling party, have been in power for 14 years, and they've shifted their message around so much. It went from, these guys are absolutely useless and they couldn't run a whelk stall to now, oh my goodness, they're going to be this hegemonic supermajority. It's actually given a huge amount of confidence to every aspect of the Labour Party. I think we just have to be honest, even though the campaign launch, as Ruth said, was a disaster, and then there was the D-Day disaster, I do think even if the Conservatives had tried to mount a sort of word perfect campaign and it had all gone very well and very slickly, I think this campaign has been over for a long, long time. People are not thinking about the last 3-4 weeks. They're thinking about the last 14 years.
We have the SNP launching their manifesto this week. They're launching it on Wednesday. I thought it would be a good time to check in on the campaign where you both are. So, Ayesha, you've been spending the weekend canvassing. Where are we with Labour and Scotland? They basically had, from 2015 onwards, the SNP have just eaten Labour for breakfast up in Scotland, haven't they? And they came out of the last election with just one MP. They've won one back in a by-election. How's it looking for Labour up there, Ayesha? What's going on?
Well, as you say, I mean, Labour has had such a traumatic time in Scotland. I will always remember that night in 2015. It was like watching a sort of political massacre happen sort of in real time. And Labour has taken a really long time to recover. But things are feeling very different for Labour on the doorstep. Now, the other thing, just what's really important to know, that in Scotland, it's different from England. The Labour Party and the Tory Party are not going up against each other in Scotland. There are very few seats which are two-way marginals, Labour-Tory. It's the SNP versus Labour, or it's the SNP versus Conservative. So what I've been finding talking to people is that a lot of people who have been SNP supporters and who do want independence, two things have happened. One, they're fed up with the SNP. They don't think that things are really changing in Scotland. They want a change. They do want to kick the Conservatives out. And even though many people still care about independence, it's not their sort of top issue anymore. It's kind of like probably number 6 or 7 down the list. So all of this is adding up to, I'm not saying, look, people were not like, oh my God, I love the Labour Party, but people are saying, I do want a change. I do feel it's time for a change.
And Ruth, this has been the great battle in Scotland, hasn't it, over the past decade? Well, longer than that, but a decade on from the Scottish independence referendum. What do you think we're expecting to hear this week from the SNP or independents, or have they parked this for the time being?
No. I mean, the new leader, John Swinney, who's been in for just a matter of weeks, actually, before this election was called, has said that it will be page 1, line 1 of the manifesto will be a commitment to independence. What's interesting is the most recent poll out in Scotland, so that was on Sunday, it was in all the Sunday papers, has Labour on 34 in Scotland, the SNP on 30 in Scotland. But it also has two other parties. So they're ahead of the SNP by 4%, and that gives them like 25 seats across Scotland, a big bounce back. But the Green Party is pro-independence in Scotland, and the Alba Party is Alex Salmond's party. They have 4 and 2% each. So actually, if you add all that up, if they could have not had that mini split that they've got, they would be sitting on 36%, and that would give the seat projection something very different. So it's tight, it's interesting.
I agree with Ruth. I think Labour's going to get around the sort of 20 to 25 seat mark. And remember, it really helps Keir Starmer with his majority to win back those seats in Scotland. In terms of the SNP, I feel like the SNP has stabilised after a very difficult time. People quite like the combination of John Swinney, Kate Forbes and also Stephen Flynn in Westminster. Stephen Flynn is a very good performer. So I think even though the SNP will lose support, I don't think there's going to be another leadership challenge, because I think people are like, OK, fine, fair enough, give them a chance. And the other thing that your listeners really, really need to know is that, yes, we have this election coming up on July the 4th, but that will then kick off a long campaigning period in Scotland for 2026, where there are going to be very important Holyrood elections. And that's going to be really interesting, because the SNP will then say, if Labour wins, you've got a Labour government in Westminster, how have they changed your life?
Well, look, it's the SNP manifesto launch on Wednesday, so we're going to hear from the SNP on Sky News. Now, let's do some questions, starting with Andrew, who has a question for you two.
This will be the first time in your adult life, I guess, that you're not able to vote. How does it feel to be so deeply involved in politics and yet not able to vote?
So what this is that peers don't vote in general elections. So these two baronesses that I get the pleasure of hanging out with have been ennobled in the last 5 years. So how does it feel to not be able to vote? Ruth?
Rubbish. It feels absolutely rubbish. I've never not voted. I've voted in every council by-election. I've voted I really take it seriously. And for those out there that are wondering, it is only, in terms of people over the age of 18, it is only members of the House of Lords, members of the royal family, and prisoners that aren't allowed to vote. So we're in with some company.
Whoa. Ayesha, how does it feel for you? Because you've only just become a baroness. It's been a very recent thing.
I'm like an infant baroness at the moment. I am gutted for the same reasons as Ruth. I love voting. I'm one of these people that gets ridiculously excited and very proud of my country and a little bit weepy and emosh when I go to a little primary school and get those wee pencils and go, I actually feel like it's the best of Britain, and I actually feel like there's a lot of stuff which is absolutely terrible in this country, but we have democracy and it is a great thing. But what we are getting from our whips, we keep getting these messages just to remind us going, you cannot vote, you must not vote, remember not to vote. It's the opposite of get the vote out messaging that you normally get.
Right, when someone tells me not to do something, my massive impulse is to go and do the thing. You're like, I'm going to go do it because you keep telling me not to. Do you do that?
I'm going to have to be locked into my house. Someone's going to have to come and barricade my front door that day.
Oh my God. All right, we've got another message here. This one's about manifestos, because we're still in the middle of the manifesto launches. So basically, if a party doesn't win power, how much of a manifesto remains party policy? That's from Rob. Ayesha, do you want to go on that? That's a good one.
Well, if a party doesn't win power, then the manifesto becomes completely redundant. Of course it does. Why would you cling to a vote-losing, election-losing manifesto? I mean, there are still people in the Labour Party going, why have we moved away from the 2019 manifesto? Because we got spanked. That's why we've moved away from the 2019. So I'm afraid if your manifesto, which is your kind of offer to the public, if it totally tanks and everybody gives you two fingers, then you've got to think, maybe it's time to change tack.
So I'd be a bit more nuanced than Ayesha. Yes, you're not actually held to it, but you still also have to have a party policy on X, Y and Z. And when you're in opposition, and if you get beaten in an election, you usually change your leader, and they've got their own ideas, and they will have policies that have been in their leadership election that then become party policy when they become leader. But you start changing things out, and one of the ways that you can show the country that you've changed is you then do sections of it. So you then do a big report into benefit reform or into like rural affairs or whatever it is, and that kind of you almost section by section renew until you get closer to another general election.
Okay, right, we've got one more. We've got Caroline. She's asked a really good question about reform. She wants to know why reform can propose candidates for Parliament when they are set up as a business, not a political party. Ayesha, how is reform structure different to the other parties?
It's a really interesting question, and reform is very different. It is basically a kind of private company, and Nigel Farage, the leader, really is the sort of director of this company. They didn't have to have a leadership contest in the way that other political parties done. He's got the controlling stake. You know, he could fire people like Richard Tice or David Bull, who are the other kind of deputy leaders now. And the really interesting thing about reform is that because it isn't a traditional political party, it doesn't have to get snarled up in the same processes that other big political parties have to do. If they want to do a policy or, you know, change something in their manifesto, they don't have to go through committees. They don't have to have internal. It's a bit like in the last 7-way debate, Nigel Farage was asked about the 2-child cap, the policy. And clearly, just in the moment, he just thought, yeah, I don't like that. He just made that up on the spot, and that's probably now policy. So they have a very different structure. But remember, this is a vehicle for Nigel Farage to get into politics. I think he will win that Clacton seat. I think he will cross the floor at some point and become a Conservative MP, and that becomes the big political vehicle for him. I think he's going to do a bit of a Trump on the Conservative Party in the way that Trump came in and took over the Republican Party.
And that's going to be a discussion, I think, within the Conservative Party, whoever becomes leader. Some of them are saying that they would welcome him back, others are not. If he gets his toe in the door, I agree with you, Ayesha, he's going for full takeover of the Tory party. So, woo.
Really, because I was going to say over my cold, dead corpse. No, I mean, in terms of, like, I think the party would be absolutely imbecilic to let somebody who has stood against the party in different vehicles, whether it was for UKIP, whether it was for reform, whose stated aim is to destroy the Conservative Party, who has tried to, if not be able to win seats off us, then do enough damage so that we didn't win, to let them in order to mount a full takeover and be the kind of parasitic worm that takes over its host. No. Like, I think there'll be a lot of Tories that actually decide to stand and fight.
But Ruth, I think the issue is, I think there's going to be a disconnect, I think, between the remaining Conservative MPs, and many of them, by the way, are, the way they've selected, are a bit more centrist, but there's going to be a big disconnect between them and the activist base as well. So I think that's where it's going to get tricky.
Yeah, and we will. When we lose, we'll go more right-wing, and then we'll lose again, and we'll go more right-wing again, because people learn the wrong lessons from defeats. And you've seen that in Labour, where you go more left-wing, and then you go more left-wing again. And, you know, that tends to be the cycle. But there will be a fight for the soul of the Tory party, and I think there will be a lot of people that realise that perhaps their wing isn't in the ascendancy. But there are extinction events, and something like Nigel Farage taking over might be an extinction event.
Ruth, you don't think it will happen in the end?
Well, I think there's going to be a fight. I think it'll be a big fight.
Well, look, we will be, of course, back on Friday with the next call-up from Jess's subs bench. Don't forget to get in touch and keep those WhatsApp messages coming in. Get me on the burner phone, 07934 200 444. Email us at electoraldysfunction@sky.uk, or you can tweet me at Beth Rigby. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on Friday. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.